Yeah, I have a friend, he teaches down in Texas, and he has a Ed Gonzalez tenet. He has a great line. I remember he said it to me once that history is too important to be left to the historians. We all need to participate.
This is the Drive-By History Podcast. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Ken Magos. On today's episode, I'm joined by Monmouth University professor, Dr. Richard Veit, a name and a face that are likely very familiar to Drive-By History fans. All right, let's get started. Rich, I'm so happy that you're able to join us today and we get a chance to talk to you offset from Drive-By History.
Okay, this is a real pleasure. It's so much fun to help out with any of our drive-by history projects.
Oh, well, you are certainly part of the family. I think you've won the award of having the most episodes with us. And we're thrilled to have you back again. I hope that we continue that relationship for a very long time.
I do too. It has been a thrill talking to people about all these interesting historic sites. From mines with fluorescent minerals to Bonaparte's home.
No, it's been fantastic. Yeah. Well, and you bring such a wealth of knowledge, so it's wonderful. Which leads me to my first question for you. So you received your PhD at the University of Pennsylvania in historical archaeology and anthropology. Can you talk a little bit about the intersection of those two disciplines and how they help inform our understanding of history?
Yeah. Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
So, anthropology is typically the study of people and societies around the world, but we're also interested in ancient societies, hence archaeology, and in human evolution, human origins. Historical archaeology is kind of a subfield within anthropology that developed in the 1960s when archaeologists started turning their attention and maybe their trowels to kind of American history and trying to say, can we learn more about colonial America, 19th, even early 20th century America through archaeology by studying the things people left behind. So there's been a tremendous amount of archaeology at places like Williamsburg and Jamestown, but also at sites that's associated with everyday people. And as an anthropology student, I found that really compelling, like a way to tell the stories of the past using stuff as well as documents.
Well, I know that having joined you on one of those digs at the Trent House, It's interesting what you're able to learn from the little fragments that you're pulling from the ground. A little piece of brick, it's a piece of yellow brick. That yellow brick happened to come over from Europe. I remember that very specifically.
That's great. That's a wonderful example of those Dutch bricks from the Netherlands.
Mm-hmm. No, it's fascinating though. But what was interesting to me is that you were then able to expound on that find from a cultural standpoint, from a commercial standpoint, looking at the economic development that was coming into the country, what they were able to do with it once they got here. I mean, for me, it's like that's where the anthropology side of it really kind of meshed with that archaeology. Not to answer the question for you, but yeah.
Well, one of my heroes in the field was a fellow named Jim Dietz, and he wrote a book in the 70s called In Small Things Forgotten. And it was all about how you could take these little bits of the past and you could tell big stories about them, compelling stories about folks who sometimes had been ignored or erased by history, and sometimes were famous individuals. But using those artifacts and bringing them together with other sources, whether it's visual sources, paintings, photographs, documents, oral histories, and getting kind of a more holistic understanding of the past. I think that's so much fun. I really love doing it.
But I like that point that you brought up. It's a holistic view of history. It's not just an event happened and we need to understand that. It's understanding the parameters that surround it, the things that caused it, the outcropping from whatever that event was, really understanding that.
Yeah, I have a friend, he teaches down in Texas, and he has a Ed Gonzalez tenet. He has a great line. I remember he said it to me once that history is too important to be left to the historians. We all need to participate. So as an archaeologist, I've tried to embrace that.
I love that. I love that. And I will only add, I hope that we always dig for the truth in those stories as well.
Indeed.
The veracity is important.
Right.
So you, and we actually brought this up on a recent episode that's going to air soon, but you authored a book called New Jersey, A History of the Garden State, or co-authored. I know that you're a co-author on the project. There was a quote in there by John Cunningham about New Jersey being a mirror on America And then you went on to talk about the fact that through the study of our state being New Jersey, we can better understand the history of the nation. I would love for you to elaborate on that if you could.
Sure. So John Cunningham is a really interesting fellow. He was sort of a beloved New Jersey historian who started out as a journalist, traveling around, writing local interest stories. And this morphed into a whole career writing dozens of history books, some pretty wonderful ones. And I love that line from him because I thought it embodied our state. So New Jersey is obviously a small state, but it's a remarkably diverse state in every sense, from the beaches of Cape May to the highlands of the northern part of the state. You'd think you're in completely different parts of the country. It also has incredible cultural diversity. You know, we are the antithesis of a food desert. You can eat cuisines from around the world, and we've been a place, a destination for folks from around the world for hundreds of years. And obviously, there's a long, rich Native American history before that. And then when you look at the major themes in American history, so the settlement and colonization, the Revolution War, industrialization, agriculture, temperance, women's history, they all play out in really interesting ways here. It's like we're a pressure cooker. So we see great examples. It's almost like the state is kind of the equivalent in a historical sense of Forrest Gump, right? And I think of the Forrest Gump movie where he's there at all these events. Well, New Jersey is too. And it makes it fun to teach about, to think about, to talk about the state's history. And because I think no matter what your particular interest, sports history, well, we could talk about, first baseball game, early football games, college football gets its start in New Jersey. There are all these examples that come back to New Jersey, a small but great state.
Even dinosaurs.
Even dinosaurs, right? The first example of really a nearly complete dinosaur in the Americas is found in Haddonfield, good old Hattie the Hadrosaurus. And completely, misunderstood at first because they don't know what they're looking at with bones like femurs that are 3 feet long, but they figure it out, and she's still around. I mean, not only is there a wonderful statue in Haddonfield, but the skeletal remains are over at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia.
We talk about New Jersey being the crossroads of the American Revolution. Do you think that the fact that people from so many different backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, were crisscrossing the state on their way between New York and Philadelphia is really one of the major benefits? It's what helped drive that cultural enrichment in our state?
Right. I think that does help drive the cultural enrichment. So if you think about the state, we are juxtaposed between New York and Philadelphia. If we look a little bit further afield between Boston and New England and Washington, D.C., it feels like we're the Middle Kingdom, frankly. We're at the center of it all. And that has drawn people to the state. Now, Ben Franklin long ago is supposed to have said that New Jersey was a barrel losing the best of its beer at both ends to Philadelphia and New York. But I think we've also collected all of these interesting people, folks like Einstein, like Thomas Edison, who made New Jersey their home because it was at the center of it all. And they had great access to everything on the East Coast from New Jersey.
Right. So it truly was a melting pot that benefited from all of those different influences.
Right.
That's a good point. So I know that archaeological digs are a really important part of your scholarship. Can you talk a little bit about how our study and interpretation of those dig sites maybe has changed in recent decades? I know there's been so much technological evolution. Has that changed the way that you approach going into these digs?
So it's changed in two ways, and that's a fabulous question. So before the technology, and we'll talk about that, but one change has been that archaeology for a long time was focused almost entirely on Native American sites or on sites associated with very, very famous individuals, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. And I think that democracy has become much more inclusive, much more democratic. We're still interested in Washington and Jefferson and certainly Native Americans, but we now, I think, are more welcoming and see archaeology as a way to tell everybody's story. And that's important. But the technology, even in the time that I've been involved, has been the changes there have really been remarkable. So when I was starting, we used surveyors' transits to measure things that hadn't changed in 100 years. We drew all our maps on paper by hand, or sometimes on mylar with ink, literally using pens that were the same as pens that Abraham Lincoln might have signed a document with. So we had this incredible sort of tradition, but now we can take photographs of sites with drones, right? That was not possible just decades ago. You'd have to go up in a small plane to take a picture of an archaeological site, and that wasn't happening. We can look below ground before we ever excavate using ground penetrating radar and other techniques like electrical resistivity or magnetometers. We're starting to do surveys using a technology called LiDAR, which sees really subtle variations in terms of a landscape. So sometimes you can see buildings before you ever excavate them. You can see where in a cemetery where burials are, even if there aren't gravestones. At the same time, technologies have helped us better understand artifacts. So when I was starting, if we dug up a Native American projectile point, we would wash that off really carefully, and then we curate it in a museum collection. What we now know is, when we washed it off, we were washing off residues of amino acids and pollen and information that could tell us, well, what was that projectile point used for? Was it used to hunt a white-tailed deer, or was it used for something else entirely? So the technology in terms of field work has changed, in terms of lab work has changed. And then, in terms of disseminating information, we can get information out on the web almost immediately. And sometimes that resolves really sticky sort of research problems. I had a find at a site in Philadelphia called the Lazaretto. It was a little square of metal, looked like it was brass, and it had some numbers on it. I had no idea what it was. And I posted a picture on social media, and people speculated. I got all sorts of answers, but ultimately what they lined up around is this is a money changer's weight from the 1700s.
Wow.
And it allows you to convert things into pounds and shillings. So just like you might go to a money exchange if you were traveling internationally today to convert your dollars into euros, let's say. Same sort of thing. And internet gave me an answer in like an hour.
That's amazing.
Whereas years ago, it would have taken, I'd have to consult with all these individuals, buy books. And so it's amazing how things have changed.
That's amazing. So in the past also, I think we talked about this a little bit at the Trent House. You would dig a hole, hope you found something. And if you did, then you try and triangulate to the left, the right, straight ahead, what direction could it possibly be?
Right.
So this technology is really helping you focus your digs so it's more efficient and produces even more results.
And the technology is evolving year to year.
Oh, yeah.
So for at the Bonaparte estate where we did a show, we've done radar 3 different times there, all with very skilled operators. But when we first did it, it's like 15 years ago, the image was like a finger painting. There was something going on. We could see it, and it got better the second time we did it. And the final time we did it, the level of detail was really superior. You still have to dig to figure out what is it we're looking at. But that level of improvement is really something. I can only imagine where we're going to be in like 10 years or 20 years.
Yeah, where do you think we are going to be? And that was going to be my next question. What do you think's coming next?
I think we're going to be able to predict where sites are with a lot more accuracy.
Yeah.
And that may mean that we can be much more selective in how we're digging, so less time wasted. I also think that there are big improvements that are coming in terms of conservation. So one of the challenges is with some types of artifacts, you dig them up and they start falling apart immediately the minute they hit the air. Conservation techniques are improving markedly, so that will be a huge plus, because we don't want to just dig things up and then lose them immediately.
Right. Well, that begs another question then too, because we're seeing so much growth and development in New Jersey right now. Are we at risk of potentially losing some sites as a result?
So I think we are. I think we're constantly losing sites. Now, The state has a robust state historic preservation office, and there are good state and federal laws that call for archaeology with certain types of development. And that helps us learn a lot. In fact, some of the best archaeology done in the state is done by private firms doing consulting. But there are a lot of projects that happen that don't have any archaeological hook, if you will. So sites are being lost, and that's a shame because as the state gets built out, it's a non-renewable resource. Once they're lost, we can't really recreate them. So that's a challenge, kind of balancing development and our need to learn about and understand the past, because the past shapes who we are today.
Absolutely, absolutely. That is something that you and I have talked about often, off camera and on camera, and I think it's so important. So I'm curious, what's your favorite dig site in New Jersey that you've been on? I know you've been to several.
Oh, that's a tough one because
I know I'm asking you to pick your favorite child.
It is that is the same question. I think I'm going to give you two, so I guess I'm cheating. I have tremendously enjoyed working at Point Breeze, the former Bonaparte estate. It's got a great story of a former king in exile, but it also has earlier Native American components as well as later archaeological deposits. So that's a fun place to work, and I love this story. I've also, so the last couple of years with students and colleagues, I've gotten to work at Jockey Hollow, part of Morristown National Historical Park. Very different type of site, not as artifact rich as the Bonaparte site. And unlike the Bonaparte site, where you could say, well, the Native American deposits go back thousands of years, Jockey Hollow, it's really focused on a several-year period, 2-3 years, where the Continental Army was there. So not as rich, but the stories, I think, are equally compelling. So we found artifacts that spoke to a mutiny by Continental troops during the Revolution, a story that was not particularly well known, but we found some physical evidence for it. We could see how the soldiers who were really suffering when they were there were sort of packed into these really tight huts, and were eating probably foods that weren't their first choice. So that's another favorite site. But I've been blessed with the opportunity to work on a lot of different sites, so it's hard to pick.
So I'm curious, a site like Jockey Hollow, then, what are you finding that is helping you create that interpretation that tells you that the troops were suffering, that they were there for a couple of years? What are some examples of findings?
Yeah, so people had worked there before, and they'd excavated some of the huts. And one of the things we did is we tried some new technologies there, some magnetometry and other things, and we ended up and metal detecting as well, which proved really productive. And we found out that, well, the huts are really important. We've got 8, 12 guys jammed into these small huts the size of an average suburban bedroom today. So much of what was going on in the camp was outside of the huts. It was outdoor living in a sense, even probably in the middle of winter. So right next to the buildings, we'd have pit deposits with animal bones in them from cows and pigs. And some of these bones were broken up into tiny fragments. It's like they are trying to get every morsel of every calorie of nutrition they can out of the food they're getting. So that was a surprise. Another thing we saw was we found a number of pieces of what are called grape shot. These were fired out of a cannon, and it would be used in an anti-personnel capacity. And this was scattered in front of the camp. And we found out that when the soldiers mutinied, cannon were brought out and were deployed. And our thought is that the grape shot, even though no one was killed by cannon fire, may have been representative of that mutiny, of that incident. So again, there are these evidence. These little pieces that we try and put together, what in some cases are sort of circumstantial cases from.
No, that's really fascinating then, because you're finding evidence that supports the theories that have been posited.
Another fun thing at Jockey Hollow is we have a lot of USA buttons. So the soldiers would have had uniforms and their buttons would have said USA. And that's kind of cool because it speaks like we're creating a national army out of all these different colonies or states. But we also had a British button in the camp from the Royal Welsh Fusiliers. And I tell you, my students could have written a novel about that, because it's like, is it a spy in the camp? Is this a
Right.
captured uniform? Is it a captured uniform that has been now dyed and reworked to be an American uniform, but they still need a spare button? We don't know, but it speaks to sort of the complexity of that era and what was going on.
Yeah, but it invites more questions,
Right, exactly.
which is always a wonderful thing because then it keeps you exploring,
Keeps you guessing and
keeps you
thinking,
guessing.
exploring.
Exactly. Well, I'm curious now. You've had a long tenure with Monmouth University. Can you talk a little bit about the university's commitment to excellence when it comes to teaching history and archaeology? I know these are two things you're passionate about.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. So Monmouth has sort of three themes that it's really emphasizing as a university right now, and excellence is one of them, access is another, and ambition is the third. So I started teaching at Monmouth about over 2 decades ago, and started with a field school my first year at a local historical site, and I was given sort of basic resources to get started. But over the years, the university's really invested in archaeology. So now I have a good colleague, Adam Heinrich, that I get to teach with, who's another archaeologist, as well as Jeff Fuad, a GIS specialist, and public historians like Melissa Ziobro. So we sort of built out this area because there's been a lot of student interest. I mean, over the years, I tried to calculate the other day. I think hundreds of students have participated in our field schools, our field projects, and it's really gratifying. Many of them have gone on to careers in archaeology or history, which I think is often a surprise both to them and their parents. Right? They came to Monmouth planning to study X or Y, and they fell in love with this topic that might seem a little bit limited. Archaeology. What are you going to do with it? But they find out, oh yeah, there's like a whole career of work there for people in cultural resource management. So the university has been really wonderful in terms of supporting archaeology, and I think it also has grown to appreciate the fact that when our students are engaged in these local public projects, it's a benefit not just to the students but to the whole community, and it often generates really positive publicity.
Well, and that's an important fact because you're actually then going into the communities for these digs, you're going to the communities for these investigations. So it creates a sense of pride within those communities to know more about their past.
Right.
It's
Yeah, and we
wonderful.
can help facilitate their learning about their past. I mean, it's wonderful. We have students who go off to Belize and to Italy and to other places to work on archaeological projects, and that's fantastic. I mean, I want to encourage that. But the local connection, I think, is really important, and it makes us, we're a private institution, but it's a real public service
Mm-hmm.
time.
Well, it connects you with the local community as well. I mean, it's just, I
Right.
think it's a wonderful thing. It's what we try to do with our show, but you guys
Mhm.
are really doing it on the granular level, which is why we come to people like you to come and join us on camera to talk about it. And I
Right.
also have to say, I'm sure the success of those students in the program is due in no small part to you,
Oh,
to
well,
your
thank
passion
you.
for the subject and your willingness to share so much of the knowledge that you have. That's really wonderful.
Ken,
So
that
where do
is
you see
really
the future
kind.
of the program now that you have a chance to kind of grow it?
Well, I would hope to see us continue to be really deeply involved in local projects. In fact, we've had conversations this summer about like what are we going to do next year, because there are almost too many good projects to do given the number of folks we have. And I would hope that more students would choose to come to Monmouth and to places like Monmouth, where they can get this experience and then go on and have great careers managing heritage resources. There is, I mean, in so many different disciplines right now, we're not producing enough students to satisfy demand. And interestingly enough, that's true even in history and archaeology. So
Interesting. Interesting.
I'm excited about working with future generations of students.
Absolutely. Inspiring those minds. Where can people who have an interest in learning more, where can they find out more information?
Well, certainly they can go to Monmouth University's website and to my webpage through Monmouth University. Another great resource for folks interested in archaeology locally is the Archaeological Society of New Jersey, which has been around since the 1930s, publishes a journal, has 4 meetings a year, and also sponsors some public projects that people can, even if they don't know a thing about archaeology other than they might want to try it, they can get out there and participate.
Oh, wow. Can they join you on any of these
Yes,
digs?
indeed. Indeed. Yeah.
Wow. Well, and I have to say that was one of the highlights of my that season where we did the Trent House dig,
Right.
because when I was a kid, I loved digging in the dirt and finding stuff. I grew up on the West Coast.
So did I.
I know it was like being a child and they're sifting through the dirt and doing all of that. It was fantastic. I appreciate you letting me join you on that so much. It was so
And that's
cool.
a wonderful site, right? Because it's in this tiny little pocket park, if you will, in the middle of, urban Trenton, but it's a gem, and it has all these different layers of history: the Revolutionary War, the Native Americans, the first settlers, the Victorians. It's all represented there.
Well, that's wonderful. And to be fair, anybody who's watching today can check out that episode by visiting our website, drivebyhistory.org. There's a link where you can stream it directly from the pbs.org website. Well, Rich, this has been such a pleasure today. I thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you've got a new position. I'm not gonna brag on you too much, but I know that you're very important now. And we are so pleased to have been able to work with you up until this point and to continue to do so in the future.
Well, Ken, thank you so much. I look forward to continuing to work with you. It's been a wonderful experience, and I love Drive By History.
Thank you. All right. Thank you all for watching.